Often viewed as one of the most profitable farm animals, cattle are a popular option for many living the self-sufficiency life. But not all of us have room to support and feed these large animals. Miniature cow breeds are smaller, require less space and feed, but can still provide abundant meat and milk. But they come with their own set of challenges. Don't go anywhere. Pros and cons of mini cattle breeds is up next.
All right, hey everybody. Now before we jump in and talk about mini cattle, we do have a comment from viewer Barbara SL8DJ. Barbara says, why do they molt in cooler weather? Thought their feathers would help keep them warm.
That's a great question. So to clarify one thing, chickens can molt any time of the year. It's most common for them to molt in autumn when the days grow shorter and it starts to cool off.
Yeah, and while the temperatures are cooling off in autumn, they're not as cold as it's gonna be in winter. So that dip in sunlight often triggers a molt so that they're fresh, have brand new feathers when the really cold weather gets here.
Yeah, you want those fresh feathers to make sure you can stay warm through the winter. Great point. Now, let's get to the topic of mini cattle breeds. What have we learned, Steve?
Well, the International Miniature Cattle Breeders Registry recognizes 26 breeds.
Wow.
There are a few old heritage breeds and many breeds that have been developed just over the past 20 years to meet demand. Often they're classified into one of three categories according to the height at the hip of the cattle. Mid-sized miniature cows range from 42 to 48 inches at the hip. Standard miniatures measure from 36 to 42 inches, and micro minis come in at less than 36 inches in height at the hip.
I don't think anybody's going to accuse us of being miniature.
No, no micros here.
Yeah. Today we argue the pros and cons of miniature cattle breeds. So Steve will argue the pros, and I'm going to argue the cons just to keep things balanced. So with that as an intro, Steve, why don't you kick this off by sharing your first reason why small cattle breeds are a good fit for hobby farms and homesteads?
Well, you said it, right? They're a good fit. Many hobby farmers and homesteaders, well, they're limited by space. Cattle, they can require lots of space, right, to meet their grazing needs. Miniature cattle breeds require much less space. So, for example, a couple of acres, I may only be able to hold one or two large cattle, but I can have 4 or 5 minis on that same space. So it really is a benefit.
Yeah, of course, the flip side to that is true also. A con of the smaller cattle is that you aren't going to get the production capability you see in larger animals. If I butcher a 1,200-pound steer, I may get close to 750 pounds of beef for the freezer. But if my steer is only, say, 600 pounds, I only get half that amount.
Right? Isn't that awesome? I mean, that's another advantage. I mean, I love beef, but 750 pounds of beef, that's a lot of freezer space.
Get a bigger freezer.
Right? With minis, you can do smaller amounts, which means I need less freezer space. I can use it more quickly. It doesn't sit in the freezer, get freezer burn over a long time. So it's an advantage.
That's a fair point. But I'll point out as well that you'll pay more to butcher 2 small cows a few months apart than you will to butcher a single large cow once. Or if you're doing it yourself, you're going to spend more time doing 2 smaller cows than 1 large one.
Yeah, that's true. And you know, the same pros and cons are going to apply to the dairy side as well.
Yeah.
Right? A full-size production dairy cow averages 6 or 7 gallons of milk a day. I mean, a miniature dairy breed provides a more reasonable amount, right? A gallon to a gallon and a half per milking.
Well, another thing to be aware of with miniature breeds is, depending on the breed and the cow, their udders and nipples can be quite a bit smaller and closer to the ground, making hand milking more difficult, and if that's part of your plan for the cows.
Yeah, it's not. So for me, that's not an issue. I'm never milking a cow, right? But the next pro is that they're going to be easy to manage.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
So speaking from experience, trying to move and handle a 15-pound or a 1,500-pound steer can be an intimidating and challenging task.
Yeah.
Miniature cattle, they're going to be easier to handle, and they're typically far more docile than the larger sized cattle. So that makes tasks like moving them to a new pasture or providing needed injections, that kind of stuff, worming, milking, all that kind of stuff. First aid is going to be easier with mini cows.
Yeah, that's true. Most mini breeds have a reputation for being docile and friendly, and their smaller size also means that standard equipment like feeders, waterers, and chutes might not work for you if you're running miniature breeds. You may be forced to build your own or pay higher prices for specialized equipment to accommodate those smaller cattle breeds.
That's a fair point, Brian. Another big plus in minis, though, is that they're so much easier on fencing and pasture, right? So cattle can be rough on pasture. These are big animals. Those hooves and stuff, they can tear up the ground, especially around feeders or waters, can turn into a mucky mess.
Yeah, those
very,
high traffic
very fast,
areas. Yeah,
right. Fences, they lean up against them, they scratch against them, they try and get to forage on the other side. If you have large cattle, fence repair is an ongoing battle. You're never going to come to an end. Minis, they're going to be much easier on that fencing and not do as much damage to the pasture.
Yeah, you make a good point there. Yeah, it's a lot easier on the infrastructure, if you will. And while their smaller size does lead to them causing less damage to fencing and pasture, it also leaves them more susceptible to predators than larger cattle are. Since mini cows are, well, mini, they aren't as good at deterring threats or defending themselves from predators. And if your current fencing is set up for full-size cattle, you may need to modify it to keep the minis contained and safe.
All right. So the next pro to mini cattle breeds is that they're cheaper to feed. Right. This is a big one. Due to their smaller size, they eat less food, resulting in cost savings. But not only do they eat less because they're smaller, they also are more efficient at converting what they do eat to beef. So just to clear what that means for those not familiar with feed efficiency, right? You basically are looking at how much do I have to feed this cow to get a pound of beef, right? So cattle feed conversion rates, well, they can vary, right? Pretty widely depending upon the breed and the feed. But for a typical breed conversion, lies between about 4.5 and 7.5. So I have to feed a full-size beef cow 4.5 to 7.5 pounds of food based on these averages, right? To get a pound of gain in that animal. The mini breeds, they're about 25-30% more efficient, meaning they can pack on that same pound of beef while only consuming 3.25 to 5.5 pounds of feed.
Yeah.
So being smaller means they eat less to begin with, plus being more efficient with what they eat means I need less pasture, I need less hay, right? It's cheaper to feed them over the winter. It's a gigantic advantage of minis.
Yeah, that could be a huge cost savings, I know. The con side to that, however, is that while minis are going to save you on feed, they're going to hit your wallet in other areas. Starting with right up front purchasing them. They're usually going to be a lot more expensive than your standard breeds, and in some instances, extremely more expensive than standard breeds. So you're going to pay more up front for them. And then there's the ongoing costs. Cattle need care. What happens if your cow gets sick or hurt and you need a vet? Well, not all vets are familiar with or treat miniature breeds, so you may struggle finding somebody to know what it is your particular cow needs.
So before I move on to the next pro of minis, one last plug on that whole eating less thing. Cattle that eat less, they also poop less, right? That means there's less poop to clean up and haul.
I think what you meant to say was, I have less fertilizer available for my garden, right? So composted cattle manure is great for the garden and pasture. I think we all know that.
That's true. So the final pro I'm going to mention is the coolness factor, right? Many mini breeds are unique and they're just good looking. You can become, that farm who has those cows. And as already mentioned, they often command a premium price. So if you're able to breed them, you may be able to get a good return on that investment.
Yeah, but the con side of that is breeding miniature breeds is often going to be more challenging. Smaller size, it can lead to difficulties during calving, which requires careful breeding practices. And in general, miniature breeds are far more prone to genetic problems due to the inbreeding required in order to obtain the smaller sizes. And keep in mind, too, that miniature cattle breeds buy and sell more like exotics rather than standard cattle. And while that means you may do really well when you sell, it also means you may take it in the shorts. There's no guarantee that what was popular and pricey when you bought it a couple of years ago, that it's still going to be popular and pricey when it's time to sell.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So personally, I think the pros outweigh the cons, and I'm considering adding some mini cows to the farm in the future. So what about you? What are your thoughts on the minis? Let us know which side you're on in the comments.
I can say, if I were to get a cow, it'd be a mini. We sure hope you enjoyed the video, and we hope that you're going to like the video and click that button to let us know and let the YouTube algorithm know that you liked it and that it deserves a wider audience. We do appreciate your watching. Don't forget to leave those comments. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And until next time,
Happy farming.